Hello, my name is Alex. I'm from TagOps, and today I would like to show you a new feature that we've developed that's called Naming Convention Analyzer. So we will start with the documentation because I believe this is one of the most important things. So everyone can get the idea of how it works. Everyone can see how to configure it for yourself, um, and so you don't have to really wait or you have watch a video or something like that. Even though sometimes the video is easier. So in the documentation, you have a lot of different steps. It's basically like 5 steps for the full configuration. Yep, sorry, 6 steps, including the save rule. And I would like to quickly go over step number 4 because the picture in step number 4 basically summarizes the whole feature up. Um, and then we will go, of course, in the console and configure everything from scratch. Um, and we'll be able to analyze the current names that I have in my AWS account, and we can try to fix them with our naming convention analyzer. So what we see in the picture is basically a working naming convention, right? So the idea here is that we have a template, and the name that we are giving to our resources in Amazon will have to match that specific template. So in our scenario, in this example specifically, we have a template that goes like a service, so it's like a resource type. It can be EC2 or GS, can be Cognito, I don't know, you name it. Then we have the environment, which is probably something like dev, production, or QA or staging. And then we have the object. It can be anything, right? You will see how it works in a moment just to get the idea. And then you can add some optional blocks. And what you see here in green is an example of how a valid name looks like. Okay, so this gives you the idea of how the rule should work. So let's go and see it in action. Okay, so let's go to our console, and the new feature is located under naming convention. Hold on. Okay, very good. The whole new feature is located under naming conventions. Currently, I don't have any rules. And when I don't have any rules, and if I go to inventory and go to naming compliance and click on refresh, because I recently added the account, so it didn't load yet, um, we will see that the naming status is not defined. This is completely normal because we don't have any naming convention rules at the moment, so this is a valid status. There are two more statuses that you can see here once we have a rule in place that will be valid and not valid. Okay, and of course in here you have some filters, and you'll be able to filter by the naming status later on, because currently everything is not defined. Okay, so we have our resources in here. We know where we will see the results of the route we will create. Basically, you will have the status here being changed to whether it's compliant or not compliant. Now let's go and configure the rule. So when going to naming conventions, we will go and create a rule. Let's go and call it naming convention um, demo. Let's go with demo. And in the format, you have a few different formats. We took the 5 most popular naming convention formats. I will go with kebab case. This is personally my favorite. So let's start with that one. Basically, let's give an idea of what we're trying to do here. I will try and replicate the rule that we have in the documentation, as I believe this is one of the most popular naming conventions, or the one that I've been using in my AWS accounts. Um, we will go with kebab case, and we will go with now we have the blocks. So there are two different types of blocks. The first type of block is the resource type short name block. When you click on it, you can add a block. I will explain in a moment what it does. So let's call it actually resource type. So this block basically gives you the option to validate a specific resource type in the name. So let's take an example. If I'm creating an EC2 instance, I might want that in the EC2 instance to include the word EC2 or maybe an instance, right? Because if we go here, instance is abbreviated with I in my use case, right? If you're creating a flow log, you might want to add something like FL, right, to indicate that this is a flow log. Or maybe DHCP options, you will want to add DHCP. Or I don't know, Elastic IP address, it will be EIP, etc. Okay, you get the idea. So the purpose of this block is to validate those dynamic values that can change from resource to resource, um, and make sure that the value that is inside the resource matches what you expect it to be. And of course, you see here when you're adding the block, you have complete control over the naming. You can define what is legitimate for you, or you can use the default values that we provide in here, right? So this will be the first block. Let's go and add a few more general blocks. Now, general blocks are a bit different. So let's call it an environment. And in here we have two options. But in order to create the rule, to create the block, we will need at least one of these options. Either we go with allow list or a blacklist. Okay, so the allow type is sort of an allow list where you can just go click list of constants and add, for example, dev, prod, and staging. Right? These are considered legitimate values by me. So every resource that I will create in my AWS account will need to have either dev or prod or staging, or the block validation will fail, and thus the name will not be considered valid. Okay, so this is a whitelist approach. You can also go with blacklist, and in that case, you can just block some specific words that you don't want to see. For example, I had a use case where the customer said, I don't want names to contain the word test whatsoever, right, in any scenario. So you can go ahead and add that in the blacklist here, okay? And I will explain in a moment how these blocks work together, but essentially think of it when you're creating a block, creating a blacklist. This is a blacklist for this specific block. Okay, it's not a blacklist for the whole name. Okay, so we will go with allow list in this scenario, and we will allow just three different values. Let's click save. And I'll add another block, which will be something like purpose, to understand what is the use case of the resource that I'm trying to create. Like it can be a web application, right? It can be a database, or it can host some Kubernetes. I don't know, it can be considered an application. So let's add three more allowed values, and those can be, for example, web application. It can be application in general, or maybe it can be a database, right? So again, we're going with a whitelist. We have three different allowed values, and everything else will not be allowed. And when you add these blocks, if you notice, the name is automatically updated. So you get the idea of how a legitimate name should look like. Of course, feel free to play around with these blocks. You can change the location of the block and the order, so whatever feels right to you. I personally prefer the resource type in the beginning, then the environment, and then the purpose. So let's go with the example that we have here. So in the example, we have an EC2 instance. So if the current naming convention, a valid name will be idev web. A valid name can also be idev, idev db, or maybe idev app. Um, this might not be enough for EC2 instances, right? Sometimes you might want to add another block. Let's call it numbering block, okay? At the end of the name. So you can just say like dev app 1, dev app 2, dev app 3, etc. Or maybe add one more block of like a team name, right, or application name or stuff like that. I'm going with numbers in this one because, well, we're doing a short demo in here. And the right approach here would be to go and create a regex, but I don't have a regex out of the box. Um, so we will go with just a list of constants, okay? And we can go and add all of the numbers from 1 to 9, including the 0. And then these numbers will be valid values, okay? And again, we're using the whitelist approach. So basically, what we did is that now we require the name will have some sort of a number. And it can be a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, etc. It can be any number you want. It's 1, 2, 9, 5, 9, whatever. Um, and now you're wondering, okay, well, what happens if I want to add another block? Because at the moment, adding another block will give you an error, and you will see that the block there is just too many blocks, so it says it's not a legitimate name. And you might think that maybe I'll add another block, and you can be correct, but in some cases you don't know exactly how many blocks at the end would you like to include. Okay, so let's set some rules here. Um, the last block, the numbering block, if we add another block, so it will be the next one, but the last block in the naming convention is always called a suffix. Okay, and when in the bottom of the rule configuration, you have what's called suffix configuration. So if we choose no suffix, that means that the last block is treated as a normal block. There is no any special suffix or something like that. So we always have to match the structure that you see here in the template. Now, when we click on unlimited suffix, the last block, the numbering block, becomes optional. Okay, you don't have to include that, and you can and IDEF app can be a valid name, and then you can add a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, whatever, right? So you can go on and add blocks as you see fit. It doesn't really matter because again, we're working with an unlimited block. But one thing that does matter is the validation, right? How do we know that the last block is valid? So the last block, and when working with unlimited suffixes or limited suffixes, the last block, in our case the numbering block, will be the template for all the other blocks. Meaning that I cannot go and add an A here because it's not what I configured in the numbering block, right? If we go back to the numbering block, the allowed values are 1 through 9 and 0. Okay, so I cannot go around and add name letters in here. So we will have to comply with the numbers. Okay, with the numbering block in our case. If you add another block or change the order, you will have to comply with the order of the new block. Okay, so if we go, for example, and click and take purpose, so the whole naming convention changes a bit, and we will have to go IDEV1, and then we click like database, right? And then we can go web and add the app, whatever. It will be valid, but you will have to match the template of the last block. Okay, so I'll switch around back to numbering. Let's go with the B1, etc. So this is the unlimited suffix option. Let's go to the last option, limited suffix. So in limited suffixes, we are limiting, so the last block also becomes optional. You don't have to include that, but we limit the amount of times the additional blocks can be repeated. So if we go with -1, um, numbering is also counted as a suffix right now because it becomes an optional block and it's considered a suffix. And the repeat count that we've configured is also 1. So we cannot go ahead and add one more block. But if we change, let's say, the repeat count to 3, you will see that we have 3 blocks. So we can go ahead and add two more blocks to the last block, to the numbering block. So in total, we have 3 suffix blocks. Okay, so 1 suffix block, 2 suffix block, 3 suffix block. Okay. So I hope that's clear. And again, what we talked about in the unlimited suffix, that the last blocks, when you're working with unlimited or limited, has to match the template of the numbering. So again, even in this case, we cannot go ahead and add A or letters, etc. We have to comply with the numbers as configured in the numbering block. Okay, I hope this is clear. So that works for me. This is the naming convention that I would like to use. I will go with unlimited suffix for my use case. It's just easier to work with. And let's click on create. Now, when the rule is created, we have to attach the rule to our AWS account, right? So your AWS account has to be onboarded to TagOps, and once it's onboarded, you can add it to the naming convention rule that we've just created. Um, and after you add the account, you have to click recalculate. When clicking recalculate in the backend, there is a function running that will go ahead and check whether your current names of your resources match the rule that you created. Okay, and if it's a match, it says valid. If it's not a match, it will say invalid. So let's go and see what's the status. Okay, so we'll click refresh and we will see that we already have an answer. So most of our resources are invalid. There is one valid resource here though. Um, so you might be wondering, okay, how much time does it take? Because currently in my use case, it was instantaneous. I mean, it took us a few seconds and we already had the status in here. So it depends on the amount of resources you have in your environment. In my environment, I had just 200 resources. It's not much. It's almost nothing. Most environments have thousands, so it can take maybe a minute, but not. It shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. I think even in the biggest environments. But again, it all depends on the amount of resources. So maybe there may be use cases like this, but I doubt. Um, okay, so now that we have our naming status, let's go and filter for invalid names because this is what's interesting. Um, and we will see in the invalid names that we have plenty. First of all, we have a lot of different invalid names, um, 197 of them to be exact. So what do we do from here? In TagOps, we offer an option to edit your name tag. Okay, but not all resources in Amazon support that. So, for example, API key name cannot be changed without recreating the whole key from scratch, and we do not do that. I would expect you to go in and do that by yourself in the console in AWS because this can be a disruptive behavior. It can, you know, cause issues in your environment, and we don't want to do that. However, other resources, for example, client certificates or maybe EC2s, right? EC2s I think will be the easiest use case because almost all customers are using EC2s. Let's go with service. Um, and I don't know, we have a lot of different, let's go with with a security group. So security group actually that does actually security doesn't support name tag. Sorry. Let's go with routing tables. Right. So in routing tables we have the naming tag support, meaning that we can change the name um, as much as we want, and the name is actually represented in a tag. So when you give a name to a routing table, you will see that it's automatically behind the scenes adding a tag with a key name and value the name that you've given. Okay, so let's try and modify um, a resource from the console, for example, routing table. So now we have to remember our naming convention, right? So the naming convention in our case was, first of all, the resource type. I believe it is RTB. We will see in a moment if it doesn't match. Um, then we go with the environment. So let's call it dev, and then we need to give it a purpose. So this will be a part of the application, some app, right? And then we should give it a number, even though it's not a must. So I will give it a number 1 because I might have a few different routing tables, and we will click save. Okay. Um, of course, right now there is a function running and going and changing the name for the name for you in your console. Let's go with route table. Let's click refresh. Okay, it's of course because we are filtered on invalid, and there we go. Okay, we see that the name was changed via the console, and the naming status is automatically changed to valid. So great. This is basically what you wanted to achieve. Okay, well, but as I mentioned, not all resources support editing the tags, editing their names via our console because not all of them work with name tags. So that's a limitation that you should keep in mind. You might also notice that not all of them are editable. So again, I go back to the fact that some resources in Amazon require recreation of the resource in order to change the name. So we do not support that in the console at the moment. I'm not sure we will ever support it because again, this is a disruptive behavior. And one last thing that I didn't talk about is the acknowledge button. So sometimes you say, okay, I have a resource, I know that the name is invalid, but I don't care. I don't want to see it. So in that case, you can go ahead and click acknowledge. And once you click it, it goes to acknowledged and you don't have to, look at it, remember it. It's a way for you to dismiss the finding, basically. And of course, getting it back from acknowledge is Just as simple. Remove from acknowledged and it's back. Uh, that's it. I hope it was informative. Hope it was short. Thanks everyone for your time.